So welcome everyone to the CMU Summit Smart Infrastructure panel. I'm the president of the 10 CMU Summit, and we're on behalf of the CMU Summit. Again, we're really honored to have our four esteemed guests over here: Professor Burgess, Mr. Feng, Dr. Gong, and Dr. Yang. So to kick off our panel discussion, we know that smart infrastructure is a really broad topic, and I know that each of you are working on a different aspect of it. So before we start diving deep into specific areas of smart infrastructure, I think maybe we can first talk about like what it is and how your experiences relate to it. And I guess maybe we can start with Mr. Feng here.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Tiger, for having me, and it's really honored to be here. So I actually work for VMware. So GreenPalm is a distributed database in VMware under the VMware brand. It's open source database. So VMware is basically an infrastructure company. They provide the software-defined data center. So it's basically it basically penetrated all the enterprises, private clouds. Okay, so it also offers public cloud offerings. So basically, it's everywhere. So it's part of the digital infrastructure. So now GreenPalm is a distributed database. So what happened is that in the last few years, because of the pandemic, there's a big surge in the data area. So basically, all the enterprises use the digital, the smart infrastructure to do business. So they accumulate a bunch of data. So nobody's deleting data. So we sort of like help them to store the data. So in China, basically, because I'm living in China, the GreenPalm is consumed everywhere, like by JP Morgan, by US, the UBS, and everybody. So in China, basically, all the public cloud basically use GreenPalm to store their data. So for their historical transactions. So that's what I observed in the past few years, basically big surge, big surge in the digital infrastructure. And we are kind of lucky to be part of the game. So that's what my observation was. So.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Feng. Then can Dr. Yang, you can go next, I guess.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Actually, I think the definition of smart infrastructure is pretty vague. So actually, in the past few days, I looked it up on the internet, what actually are smart infrastructure, and I saw keywords like 5G, I saw AI, I saw big data, IoT, and autonomous driving. I think these are all those buzzwords that are related to smart infrastructure. If by that definition, I think what I do in Data Group, which is a company I co-founded, is actually totally depend on those technologies, because we are doing on-demand delivery, and as a new way of doing logistics. And you can kind of think of us as a Uber for delivering stuff. So Uber delivering people, we are delivering stuff, and we're focusing on the China market. And the company, this new type of logistics is built entirely on mobile internet and 4G, in the sense that every customer that need a delivery service will use a mobile phone to send a request. And all the riders or all the couriers who are the people work on those delivery orders, they use a mobile phone too. They're not our employees. They're like just Uber drivers. They're cross-source riders, and they use a mobile phone to use a mobile app to see all the requests coming in, and pick or they assign a task that they need to work on. And so you see, like the mobile internet is really playing a key role here. And the system does all the magic by doing the instant demand and supply matching, order dispatching, automated pricing based on AI, real-time tracking, face recognition to making sure you are who you are. And we already cover words like big data, we already cover words like AI, and without all those things, our company is impossible. And this on-demand delivery become a very powerful logistic infrastructure in China right now. And totally together with all the other players in the same sector, we are delivering somewhere around 30 to 50 million orders a day. And it's definitely, super critical to a lot of people's life here, in terms of both providing jobs to all those people, as well as providing a very good e-commerce experience to the customers. So in that sense, I can probably define us as a company built on those smart infrastructure.
Yeah, that was actually a very interesting point that you brought on. I know that Data Group is a really prominent logistics company for on-demand delivery, and in a way that, as you described, that it is built upon smart infrastructure, and it itself is a kind of logistic infrastructure for our society today. And I would like to invite Dr. Gong to talk more about that, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, first of all, this is a great honor for me to coming back to join a CMU event. I've been missing so much about the campus, about the school life over there. So really hope after the pandemic can revisit CMU and we have a Pittsburgh office. So I really like the topic and strongly agree with some of the points mentioned by Dr. Yang. So I would love to mention a little bit about what my background is and what Beetle Robotics is doing. What Beetle is really doing is trying to digitize manufacturing. Because we observed in manufacturing world, it's really about two things. First is execution. So we can use robot to automate a lot of workshop level execution. Second is really about management. In order to do management, we have to have free flow of information, let the management level people knowing what's going on the factory floor in all the exact detail. And second, in the mind of the management people, they have to understand what is the model of how the operation is being executed, right? They need to know the steps, they need the logic, they need to have an organized way to organize all these resources. The reason I mention this is about when we talk about smart infrastructure, first of all, we need to understand a traditional business going to be rebuilt on top of new infrastructure. It's completely different from traditional ways of doing business. And the reason when we have this new infrastructure, the efficiency, the method to conduct conventional business will be completely reformed. Like for example, if we have 5G, if we have cloud computation, we can first of all ensure the information flow is extremely efficient, has very high density, of extremely accuracy, so that all the management people will real time being able to track all the data, all the activities happen on the factory floor, plus all the data they have, plus all the artificial intelligence capabilities, they can make decisions extremely quickly, so that the closed loop from the workflow execution to top level management decision making and go back to react on these factory floor operation can close that loop, so that everything becomes extremely efficient. And then with all the demand being digitized, all these data can flow from the consumer side all the way from this manufacturing site. And then all the manufacturing will be driven by the consumer demand in a pattern of data. So that completely reform of traditional business, traditional manufacturing is really empowering manufacturing to make that upgrade. So that's my observation of smart infrastructure. And it has to be differentiated from traditional infrastructure. It's different from like building railways, different from building these highways. It's more like focusing on digitization, focusing on artificial intelligence communication. It is using new technologies to completely reform traditional industries. And the reason we call it infrastructure, because it is a low-level fundamental layer. The traditional industry will be built on top of these new technology layers, and because of the fundamental has been changed, how things will be rebuilt or be completely changed as well.
Yeah, very good points made. Thank you very much. Then lastly, I would like to invite Professor Burgess to talk more about it and perhaps more from the field of academia.
Sure. So like everyone, I'm very happy to be here. I'm still at CMU, so I haven't left. It's not like I'm rejoining CMU here, but very happy to be in this setting. at first, when I started hearing the others define smart infrastructure, I thought I was going to be sort of the lone wolf, giving a very different definition. But Dr. Gong actually brought it closer to where I would claim the definition is. You know, I'm a professor in the civil engineering department, and I think infrastructure in general came to be through civil engineering, maybe military engineering before us. But engineering is the discipline that creates the infrastructure that on which everything stands. And I think that the main distinction we need to make is between physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure. And the smart comes when you add everything that is contained in that buzzword, because smart is the part that makes it buzzy, into infrastructure. So right now, what we would call smart is integrating artificial intelligence, integrating new communication methodologies and technologies. But in the future, this smart can actually also change. And it may mean also making things more sustainable, more responsible, more fair. All these other things could actually mean smart as well. So the definition changes, but the thing that stays the same in my mind is that we are, as Dr. Gong said, figuring out how to take the existing underlying systems that we have to make deliveries and essentially keep life functioning in modern societies. Those systems we are then marrying or embedding with new technologies in order to make them more efficient and smarter in general. In the CMU world, in the academic world, smart infrastructure actually has a sort of a standing on its own. The academic community, at least in the engineering discipline, rallies around smart infrastructure, and the papers that you will see there are typically papers about either transportation, energy, structures, or any other traditional infrastructure, but then including information and communication technologies that are trying to get into those systems. And so, yeah, that would be my simple definition of the issue.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess my next question is already kind of mentioned like earlier by Dr. Yang and Dr. Gong here, and so that will be like the innovation of the 5G technology. So we all know that 5G technology is like one of the major breakthrough points in recent years in the field of infrastructure. So I would like to elaborate a bit more on that. How has the 5G technology transformed in the field of smart infrastructure that you have worked on currently, and how maybe the field that you are working on currently incorporates or collaborates with this kind of technology to create something more of value? This time, maybe I would like to invite Professor Burgess to come first, and then we work our way like backwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just piggyback on the answer that I just gave. You know, if we focus on the smart being, in this case, a new paradigm for communication, in particular 5G, what that has done to smart infrastructure in general is it has allowed for more distributed and more efficient ways to both sense, plan, and act, which are the things that a smart infrastructure should be doing, right? And so we now have a bunch of sensors that are out there that can report more reliably than before. And we have a number of ways in which we can close the loop faster and closer to the edge than we did before. But that's you know, to give the specific examples, I would have to dive into each area. So in the transportation sector, there are many. In the building setting, there are many. I don't know if you want specific examples, but that's sort of the general answer I would give.
Right, thank you very much. Then Dr. Gong, would you like
to
share?
Yeah. So first of all, I think 5G is more suitable for industrial application, like for manufacturing, for transportation, less for consumer side. It's really because of the technology property of 5G. First of all, there is extremely low latency in the communication when we use 5G technology. And second, the bandwidth can be extremely high if we tune it correctly. And the third is actually it's tunable depending on how we're going to use the bandwidth. We can like give more bandwidth to the download or upload depending on the actual application. So what that means is really like we need a application scenario we will have like high density of like data connectivity. We have a lot of devices. We need to find an application scenario require real-time response to a lot of these like data. For example, autonomous driving or manufacturing, like real-time control of these machines, real-time quality inspection, so on and so forth, so that low latency really matters to a lot of economic outcomes. And the addition to that, I think 5G is really amazing is that a lot of things become software defined. Like previously when we build the IT infrastructure, we have like multiple layers of IT infrastructure. That physical layers is really constraining how data can flow and how data can be used. But looking into 5G, actually it's possible, like the entire communication architecture becomes homogeneous, right? And of course, how that data is constrained, whether there's a boundary, can be purely defined by software, right? We can define whether there is a site sharing part of that 5G communication resources and bound how that data will flow, whether inside of that site or can be transported out of that site. Then that really making like extremely free data flow possible no matter where that data connectivity is. And then all the applications can be redefined purely from a software layer because we have such amazing hardware platform there. We can really, based on demands, we can reroute all these data, rebuild this application, really based on the value can be generated depending on the routing of the data, the capability, the speed, the efficiency, and the accuracy of these data, right? So speaking of that, because I generate this observation and understanding from our own application, we have been using 5G technology plus cloud computations for some of the leading manufacturers. With that, so previously in manufacturing society, we will have like many management departments. Some people focus on procurement. Some people focus on sales. Some people will be focusing on like production planning, supply chain planning, right? But previously, all the data is like so blocked. Like the production planning people have no real-time access to the data of what is happening on the factory floor. So their response is extremely slow, inaccurate, and there's a lot of inefficiency because of that no closed loop from the factory floor operation and the production management. And second, the production management people do not know whether there is any change of demand, any change of the procurement, any change of the orders, right? That lack of the latency of that communication and the quick interaction between the procurement department and production planning department is really making that supply chain extremely inefficient. And this is the same situation for the supply chain management and the supply management team with the production management. But think about with that new infrastructure, that 5G communication, first of all the data is in the same layer. It's in the data lake. Anyone need this data, they can access all these data in real time. Then the fundamental challenge becomes decision making. Like if you have all the data in real time, you know everything, you have to make decisions extremely quickly and make high quality decisions. Then that's where artificial intelligence comes in play. If you can make high quality decision extremely quickly, then the connectivity plus all the coordination among all the social resources become extremely efficient. It's like purely from a demand being generated as a form of data, all of a sudden maybe the factory is reconfigured itself to use stuff to satisfy that demand. Think about that super efficient closed loop. It's really like accommodating all the challenges, making things flexible and making everything extremely efficient.
Yeah, thank you very much. Then Dr. Yang, would you like to elaborate more on this issue?
I think Dr. Gong just gave a very good description of that 5G, and I think he's probably right saying that it has less applications in the consumer-facing side. But I'm still trying to give two small examples on the consumer side how we hope that 5G can change our world and make the service a little bit better. I think one thing we can definitely benefit from the much bigger bandwidth enabled by 5G. In our application, we actually are talking about kind of the video or even like AR augmented reality communication between the customers and the people who providing service. For example, we provide a on-demand e-commerce, on-demand retail service to the customers, basically by someone shopping for the customers inside a supermarket. And one difficulty that we have is when you're talking about all the fresh stuff, all the fresh items, the customers always want to pick the thing that they want. They don't want other people to pick the thing for them. So one application we have been talking about inside the company is to enable a kind of the video communication between the customers and the so-called buyers or the pickers inside the supermarket, right? So, but of course, that's going to consume a lot of bandwidth. And if we have 5G, I think that kind of communication will become a reality. So that's one tiny example that we think we can benefit from that. And the other thing we have talked about is having more smart devices in our service. For example, we can make the delivery box very smart, and we can put like smart sensors enabled by 5G into those delivery box. So if someone pass the delivery box from one person to another, right now they need to do some operation on their mobile app to say, hey, I passed this box from A to B, and if that box has smart sensor in it, like the system will track that automatically. We even want to put like the thermometers into the delivery box to get the temperatures of whether the food is still hot, right? And we want we don't want anyone to take the temperatures. We want that temperature to be reported to the system automatically by a smart sensor inside the delivery box. And all those things I think will be benefited from the 5G technologies because it make all the devices more connected. So there's another example that we think we're going to benefit from the 5G technology. Of course, I think 5G has more applications in the world of autonomous driving. That's another big areas that we are looking into, and hope we have more time to talk about that in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Yang. Then, Mr. Feng, would you like to elaborate more on the issue regarding that?
I think Dr. Yang, Dr. Gong, and Professor Burgers already gave a very good overview of the technology. Basically, the technology has two layers: the hardware layer, then also the software layer, right? So the hardware layer, we saw that bunch of surge in the edge computing because 5G is generating lots of data. So we can't send all the data to the cloud. It's too much data to send. So in the software layer, then we sort of like extracted some of the metadata from the 5G, then stored in the cloud. Then as Dr. Gong said, then AI is a place to kick in to make sense out of data. So we see like an example like the agriculture, that people putting lots of cameras to observe the plants and just try to make sense of those images. What are the plants are growing, right? And how are they growing? But I want to just add one thing that sometimes, because I've been the infrastructure business long enough, and sometimes we don't know what will be the killer application. Right now, I don't see any killer application, but in someday it'll be killer application. Let me give you an example. So when I was in the mobile phone business, when we first invented the web browser, okay, we put the browser on the mobile phone, and we put the color monitor on the mobile phone, and lots of people ask, what are we gonna do with that? Because it's useless, because we just do text messaging and phone calls. So what are we gonna do with those? Right? Now think about it today. If you take out your iPhone, I just ask you to messaging and then phone calls, you probably can live with that. Right? So I'm basically expecting a new generation of creative applications on top of the hardware infrastructure and the software layer and the AI on top of that. So we are kind of looking forward to the killer applications. But I'm confident it will come someday.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Feng, for mentioning the example of a web browser or a smartphone. Yeah, that was the kind of like a really interesting point you mentioned there. And then moving on from the 5G perspective, I think all of you brought up like really great points regarding as 5G applications in different aspects of smart infrastructure. As Dr. Yang has described in the consumer side, Dr. Gong has described on the manufacturing side. And throughout all those different aspects of application of 5G technology and smart infrastructure, we can see a common characteristic, shall we say, of all of them is that the trend is clear, is that every aspect of smart infrastructure is creating more and more data, regardless of the form of data. The data can be for management purposes. The data can be for consumer side. Then with increased bandwidth and increased capability of sending data, how do you imagine the role of data and the role of big data basically in the future development of 5G technology, smart infrastructure, and the overall I would say the underlying layer of technological support for our society? I guess this time we can go first with Mr. Feng.
Yeah, I'm in the data business, so data is becoming very, very powerful. And we know that's too powerful, so the Chinese regulators just kick in. You guys read the news, you guys know what they're doing. So even in the US, I mean, like, you know, the data, I mean, basically they use data for a lot of stuff. I mean, Green Palm is widely used in the US too. And so most of the users, like in the financial business, because for financial business, data is everything. Like if you have like build a model, your accuracy or your model is more accurate, like by like say like 1/10 of thousand, then you have a significant competitive edge. So data is a new fuel in this like a smart infrastructure. So it enables lots of new capabilities. But what I'm more emphasizing is that that power needs to be carefully used and we need to be democratizing the power, because this power is normally owned by very few digital companies. Let me just give you, I was like doing a study, like let me give you an example, like the top 5 digital companies, okay, in the US, they like their market cap is almost 40% of the US GDP, okay, last year. Probably you guys didn't realize that. So that's pretty significant. But so what I'm saying that the power they have is significant. So I can give you more examples, like how they use data to build financial models to raise the accuracy of the credit rating systems. They can use to look at the transactions, the frauds, right? So they do a lot of things with that. So I think that's a lot of examples I can give, but I would like to shed some of my thoughts on the power that need to be scrutinized and democratized.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really interesting that you mentioned like we should not only consider the benefits of big data technology can bring to us, but also the power issue and also the security we might face facing this immense power brought by this immense amount of data. Dr. Yang, would you like to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Dr. Fan on the power of data and all the security issue related with data. For us, the data is a big enabler of a service. Without data, we don't exist. I think in the logistic world, people usually joke that we are the people who move the box, right? But the difference is that in the traditional logistics, if you don't have data, if your server is down, you're still able to provide a service because the customer knows which number to call and the truck will show up to pick up your stuff. With a Uber-like service like what we provided, without data, when the server is done, the service has to stop. Without data, we don't know how to price each order. Without data, we can't find a rider for the job. So we are first and foremost a data company, and we definitely consider data as the biggest asset we have. But with that comes a lot of responsibilities because we happen to have the name, the phone number, and the address of hundreds of millions of people in China, and that the security is always on top of our mind. And luckily, with a lot of stuff we we have done to safeguard our data, nothing bad happens. But we sometimes read the news of other players in the data and internet business. They are being hacked. So this is definitely something that keep me up at night. And we have done a lot of things in the past 6 years to safeguard data, both internally and externally, to be frank.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Gong, would you like to talk more about this issue?
Sure. Yeah, this is an extremely interesting topic. I definitely agree with the other speakers. We have some concerns, we have some challenges we have to solve before we really fully embrace this new power of data and the new power of the connectivity. There's like concerns about privacy, concerns about what data can be collected and how we should and how we can use the data. There's definitely a lot of concerns and a lot of people are working hard on that. But I'm always very optimistic about new technology because I come from a technology background, so I really can see and really hope the new technology, the data can bring great benefit to the society. So what I really observe and can see because of these new smart infrastructure, 5G, people's changing their mindset about the data. First of all, we can see data has become broader, meaning previously a lot of data is only defined in constrained word, right? Each company might have their own definition. Different places have different places to hold these data, whether in a form of digital form or on paper or any other different places. We can see all these data being like standardized, washed into the similar structure and can be shared across these borders. So any of these physical boundaries are being break down and these data becoming start to flow freely and become more efficient. So it's becoming broader. And second is with AI, with all these data, things have become deeper. So a lot of time, like for example, one event happened on the other side of the planet might cause some changes, consequences on the other side of the operation of the planet. Whereas people cannot see this connectivity, cannot see the logical clue of these two things. But because of the data connectivity, we can start gaining deeper insight. We can finding causalities of different events, and we can make deeper observations and deeper discoveries because of the data. So we can see data is really making things broader and also deeper. And I can also see the data usage will have 3 different developmental phases, and it's in progress. First of all, we can see the data usage is like going back, fitting into traditional operation procedures. People are more thinking like how to use these data to make things like more efficient, fit into traditional operation procedures, really thinking data as an assistive tool to improve traditional ways of doing business. And then all of a sudden, once we connect all the data, we will all of a sudden discover that actually with this data connectivity, we can reroute, reconnect our organization, completely rechange and redefine a lot of the jobs, a lot of the company structures. A lot of jobs can be redefined because the data flow become different. Previously, the organization of the company group might be constrained by the technology, might be constrained by how data flow, how people pass information, how people do management decisions based on limited information they can get because of these technology constraints. But because of that completely change, maybe the company will be like restructured. That means in the second phase, it's more about a transformation, more about a revolution because of the data layer is completely changing people how we think about business. And third part is once we fully embrace AI, let data free, autonomously, freely, actually more amazing things can happen. Maybe the system can self-evolve. The structure of the company, the structure of the business, the structure of the society maybe redefine itself autonomously with few human intervention. It's kind of a purely autonomous system, automatic evolving, adapting. Even the consumer demand is changing. Even human resources is changing, even like a lot of the equipment is changing. Because we have this data, the system is evolving itself and making decisions itself, always like restructure things, redefine things by itself. With that capability, like people can start focusing on more creative jobs and let the data, let the AI to handle a lot of the low-level business. That's what I see through different phases of development of usage of data.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Gong, for your elaboration on this issue. Professor Burgess, do you mind talking about this issue from the perspective of the academia, like how people discuss it in the academia, and maybe what you think about this issue personally?
Sure. So I fully agree with what the other speakers have said. You know, data as a powerful source or a source of power, and at the same time a liability. Definitely agree with that. Data as an agent of change, also very much agree with that. Even with that last point about data sort of allowing for some autonomy in the way that change happens, that is devoid of our own intervention, that could also happen. In that case, though, I would warn that we need to make sure that when we enact those autonomous systems that are evolving on their own and using data to self-improve and self-correct, we are endowing them too with our own constraints for the decision-making process and the objective functions with all of the variables that need to be in there, right? You know, like I'll give you a quick story of how things could actually be go very wrong very fast. We, as part of our smart infrastructure development here at CMU, we tried optimizing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in many campus buildings. And we were trying to track how many people were going in and out of each individual room so that we could determine how much heat to provide to the room or how much cooling to provide to the room. And we used infrared cameras pointing down from the doorways that would collect basically how many heads were coming in and out. Very privacy insensitive, we thought. But these infrared cameras, because it's infrared, have a bias that we were not aware of. Basically, different hair type absorbs infrared light in different ways. And we were undercounting certain portion of the population without realizing it. And we were making decisions. The system was making decisions, not us. The system was making decisions and evolving, you know, updating different rooms. But if the room was set with a proportion of the subpopulation that was miscounted, it was largely represented there, then it would be cooler than needed, for example, right? So this is a very simple example, right? But it underscores the importance of setting those goals from the get-go. It can't be patched at the end. The warning I'll give, and so because I agree with everything that has been said, but I think there are many challenges that exist still for us to make sure that this sea of data that is becoming available turns into not just data, but information and then knowledge ultimately. And I think that data by itself will, at least at the beginning, will not be sufficient. Maybe at some point in the future, when we have enough data and the systems have evolved to a point that it has taken us to evolve as humans, then yeah, probably data is enough. Data will win at the end. But right now, you need to pair data with a lot more in order to extract useful knowledge out of it. And the example I'll give there, just to sort of highlight something more concrete and specific, we've been doing work, and this is one of many examples, but we've been doing work on trying to figure out if bridge deterioration, like bridges are part of the infrastructure, and they're crumbling here in the US because it's aging infrastructure older than in other parts of the world. If we could collect data about vibration of vehicles that are crossing through the bridge and use that to understand the structural condition of the bridge. So since cars are already going and cars have accelerometers in them, why not use the acceleration data from the cars to inspect bridges everywhere in the US? That's great. We have the data. That data could actually be, now with 5G, available in many places at some point, right? So that's not too far. But the data alone doesn't give us anything about what's really happening in the bridge. You could be smart and you could start understanding what the vibration means and modeling what that means about the bridge. But because every bridge is different and the way that the damage to the bridge would exhibit is different, it requires a lot more than just the data. So that's one simple example. And we've been trying to crack this problem for a while, and we can do very well in simulation. But once we go into the real world, things get really messy very quickly. So I think that going forward, we need to think about data as a powerful resource, also a liability, an agent of change, but it needs to be paired with domain knowledge, very expensive metadata that you need to add to it for labeling and all these other things. And we need to also invest in those other assets if we're going to make change in this. So that would be my intervention there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Burgess. I think it's really, really interesting that you mentioned the first example of people coming in classroom, like how different hair structure can affect like how you get air conditioning as a CMU student. It's specifically interesting because it's really interesting to me because like for people at CMU that study too hard and lost too much hair, you actually get different heating conditions to those who that did not. So that was like a really funny point I saw that you brought up, and that really relates to the larger issue of the data biasing and a way data without appropriate human knowledge can be actually sometimes not operating as we intended. So I would like to further elaborate on the point of this data security and relating to the our human society's advancement of like building more suitable smart infrastructure for us. And this really relates to this new issue of smart cities. And we've been talking about smart cities for a couple of years already, and it's always seems to be like something that's already coming up or is already here. But of course, there are a lot of like logistics and economic issue in terms of like how to build it and stuff. But how do you think I would like to like raise this question to all of you. How do you think that the field that you're currently working on will contribute to the whole smart city ideology, and how your field might still need to tackle some challenges that to bring that into reality? Let's start with Professor Burgess this time.
So I'll be short. This is one where I could spend a whole lot of time. This is the one thing that I think about the most. But in short, I think that besides all the technologies that we are trying to invest in and do research on to come up with what are called smarter cities, I think there's also the need to make sure that these technologies are serving directly the communities that are in the city, as opposed to just being new widgets that are being sold for profit of the corporations and then will need to be maintained by some other people and basically, how do we make sure that they don't end up being things that people don't care about in the near future, or things that end up making people's life worse for whatever reason, right? So I think that making sure that in the design of these things, we put the community as the first-class citizen and the citizens as, again, the first-class citizens. And that's a tricky thing to do. You need to be able to consider ethical implications into the design process from the very beginning. You need to consider community input and community preferences explicitly, and always be able to sort of update those as the community evolves. And I don't think that right now we have the solutions that are at least being commercialized don't include many of these things. And that's probably one of the tricks that is missing for these smart cities to actually become useful. Everybody knows probably in this group that there have been many attempts at making smart cities, even with very large investments. The last bust was with the Alphabet has a company called Sidewalk Labs that tried to invest in Toronto, and there was a lot of backlash from the community because that smart city, even though it had all the technology buzz in there, it was also a little bit dystopian. And the way that the center of data and the power of data was on the hands of not the community necessarily. So I just think that this is a topic that needs to be considered very widely, as opposed to just centered it on just the technology.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. Dr. Gong, would you like to elaborate?
Sure. Yeah, we really focused on the manufacturing part. And we really believe factory is an important part of city, right? So I can only comment on the manufacturing related part of smart city. But so first of all, I'm really that kind of person. When we start talking about question, I would love to think deep about definition of the question itself, right? When we talk about smart city, I think the very first question I would love to mention on is what is a city, right? But no one really thought about what is a city, right? From my perspective, it's really how people organize together, right? And why people have to come together, live close to each other. Like, what's the benefit of people being organized together, right? There's definitely some like economic rationale behind that. Maybe because of the large scale operation, sharing of the resources of the city, so that the density of population is really making things more economic. That's why we start forming a city. That's probably why like a lot of cities were forming like close to the water resources, right? Close to like where traffic is more efficient, right? Because it's easier to live, more economic. And where there's a lot of factories, where there's a lot of like good education resources or a lot of medical resources, right? So the reason I want to comment on this question is really, we have to think about when we build a smart city, what's the purpose, right? We have to think about the purpose, not just do the technology, right? We're not doing research for the purpose of doing research. We have to think about a good reason, right? We have to think about whether we're improving the efficiency of that city, whether that city, because of the new technology, people might not in the future live so close to each other because things become autonomous. The geological barrier become less important. There are a lot of technology can fix them so that people can have bigger rooms. They can live in the countryside. I lived in the US for a very long time. I lived in currently now in Shanghai. So I'm always thinking about this problem because the population density is so high. Thinking about these things. So yes, really it's about purpose. And as Dr. and Professor said, there's so many different things and different layers. I think we have to think about who will be responsible for contributing to that common fundamental layer. Maybe it's about the communication, maybe about data privacy, maybe about some like digital justice and the law enforcement, making sure people are using data, constructing data properly. And then who will be responsible for the application on top of that infrastructure? Maybe some of them focusing on solving the logistic issues, some of them focusing on like consumer demand collection, some of them on like public security. And each of them have to focus on their objectives, thinking about return of investment. And a lot of commercial company might not be able to afford building the low-level fundamental layer of that infrastructure. Maybe the government should contribute to that. Maybe all these private companies should contribute part to that low-level infrastructure, build an ally, making sure they're not reinvent wheel among each other, but each of them can share some good commercial values of it, and then contributing to that ecosystem. I really think this is an ecosystem so that people have like distributed responsibility, also have an agreement on like privacy issues and also how to use data in a responsible way.
Thank you very much. Dr. Yang, would you like to talk more about this issue from a consumer logistics perspective, perhaps?
Sure. I think smart city is another vague word that I think we introduced one vague word upon another. And I think it's a kind of vague word that lack very clear definition. But I thoroughly agree with the speakers before me in terms of the in terms of both the distributed responsibilities and also the data security issues. I can actually speak from the perspective of logistics, especially autonomous driving, because this is the next big thing for both the logistics as well as the transportation business. Everyone is talking about autonomous driving or autopiloting AP. What we saw in this sector is that I think it definitely requires the investment from both the private sector as well as the government, because we see a lot of companies and also venture capital there investing in making the cars and making the delivery vehicles making them capable of autonomous driving. But there's another school of thoughts that thinking just making the cars very smart is not enough. We have to make the street very smart. We have to make the traffic light very smart. We have to make every building very smart, so that each of them has a sensor in it. Each of them can talk to each other, can talk to the cars to tell them, hey, the traffic light is red, right? Instead of having the car to detect and using computer vision to realize the traffic light is red, which sometimes they fail. And I know in China, some local government are experimenting with making every street in that small city. I think they're still doing that with not in Shanghai, not in other mega cities in China. They're doing that with small towns and cities in China, and making every street very smart, and having the cars and the other vehicles talking to that buildings and the traffic lights. And I think that's a great idea, and I think that's probably the future of autonomous driving. That is to making all the basic infrastructure of the city very smart, making the road smart, making the traffic light smart. And I think that requires the investment from both the government, because no VCs and no companies will say, hey, I will make the street of every street of Shanghai very smart, because that takes a lot of investment, and that's highly, you probably need 10 years to have your investment pay back. So that definitely the role of the government. But we already see a lot of companies making the cars very smart. So to me, I think, in the sector of transportation and in the sector of logistics, I'm really looking forward a future that the government will play a role by making the relay fundamental basic infrastructure of the city very smart, but having the other, the private sectors making, their applications to work with all the smart infrastructure in the city to build a future of, autonomous driving, to build a future of autonomous logistics that I think we all need. So that's my view.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. And it's really interesting that you mentioned about this relay of data, how the smart city concept can only work if every smart component of it works together and bring up more value out of it. So Mr. Feng, would you like to elaborate more on this data issue?
Yeah, so I like Dr. Gong's his thinking into the definition of city. Maybe we should end city with all the new technology we have right now. I think this group of panelists is very ahead of the curve in terms of thinking, but I just share some of the examples that people do smart city. So in China, we do have lots of smart city projects led by some of the very, very leading groups like Alibaba Technologies. So, for example, in Shanghai, actually, they hired a bunch of graduates from civil engineering of Carnegie Mellon. One thing they did, actually, they did survey all the traffic data. So in Shanghai, there's some of the crossings that's constantly busy mainly because the design is wrong. So they sort of made a lot of modifications. So you can see in Shanghai, there are lots of improvements made in those trafficking improvements, like Lujiazui, there's the intersection in Hempenlu and the south and north elevator. So there's constantly heavy traffic. So now they did they sent lots actually helicopters to collect the data at the peak time and managed to improve significantly. That's why I think Shanghai is more livable. But again, Dr. Gong's idea of definition of city, we can further look into. And the other thing that they're doing is that they try to break the data islands. So basically each division of the government has different sets of data. So they normally don't communicate with each other. In Shanghai, actually, you open the application called a civilian cloud. You can do a lot of things right now. It's especially helpful during the pandemic because like the green barcode and it helps shows you that you don't have the chance to to contract the virus. So they didn't make a lot of applications. So they're breaking the data islands. So that's some of the area people are working on. So I just share some examples that's going. Again, we shouldn't undermine the importance of the data data power. Okay, the privacy associated with that. So.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Feng, about this data issue. And I guess I'll now move on to questions from the audience. And for all the audience, if you have questions for our panelists, you can also type in the Q&A box, and we'll pick a few questions for the remaining time we have. So the first question coming up is, how do you solve privacy concerns? There'll be a huge amount of data collected by some sensors or smart devices, especially we just talked about this smart city concept and also the risks that huge immense data can have and all those power. Then maybe because we talked about the power issue of the data, then maybe possibly we can talk more about the privacy issue of it. Like for an individual, how do we enhance the how do we better protect the data of an individual to better address those privacy concerns? And
I don't know if you want us to self-nominate ourselves or
yeah, sure.
I'll take a first crack. So I think there are many ways around this problem. None of them are particularly silver bullets and may require many different solutions for it. But there are some promising technologies. So let me frame it this way. I think this is not a technology only problem. It's a policy and technology problem, right? But we are all technologists here in this room. So I'll even though I recognize that the policy has some implications here, I'm not going to claim myself as a policy expert. In the technology realm, there are some promising solutions that are becoming adopted in practice. So differential privacy, federated learning, and computational devices for abstracting the physical layer. So for example, instead of having cameras that record everything, you have a computational lens that filters light so that only the information that is privacy insensitive passes through, but still meets the objective of, say, for example, counting people or whatever it is. So there are technological solutions to this, but ultimately it will require that we also implement policy. We won't solve this single-handedly as technologists. So that's my first intervention there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor.
I agree with as Professor Berger says, some the policy issues, like Hein College has a very good course on confidentiality. So they shared some of the cases where people can deduct the meanings from the data they published. So I think at least there's two things we can do. One is that we need to use the data confidentiality technology to anonymously to publish the data sets. The other is that we need to get the users' consent when we collect the data, and we don't use the data beyond the consent. That's very, sounds very simple, but I know there's lots of technology companies collecting more data. They're not asking the user's consent, and even the user says the consent, they're using the data beyond that. So some of the financial company I work with, and even within the company, say this division collects the data for this purpose, and the other divisions cannot use the data for other purposes without getting further consent of the user. I think they did it pretty good actually to stick to the principles. So the principle is get a user's consent, don't use beyond that, and when you do publish the data sets, use the confidentiality technology and the policies in place. I think with those two, I think it's much better. I think it solves 80% of the problems.
I just want to add from the operation of our own company that I think there's both a growing awareness of privacy in China by the public, as well as a growing, a more strict regulation from the government that, you know, if your mobile app is trying to collect more data than you actually need from your business, then you get a government kind of warning saying why, you know, explain to us why you need those things. And if you can prove that you really need those things, then you will given a deadline to, you know, change your mobile app before that. And that become more frequent in recent years. And I think that's definitely a good direction, because you need some regulations on that. And second, you also see, you know, on other social media that the end customers are concerned about, hey, why this company is getting that data. And you see a growing, I think it's a healthy dose of concern and awareness of those things. So I think things are getting better. The companies and because of that, the companies start, you know, to self-regulate themselves to, you know, just making sure we collect the right amount of data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would love to follow up on this, making sure I still have the connectivity here.
Yeah, we can get it.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Professor Burgess. First of all, upfront, I think this is really a policy issue, and I think really the policy plays a major role here, right? When I talk about policy, it's not only talking about government, talking about these influential organizations. It's also about taking opinions from the public, and even sometimes educating the public of why this data should be collected, what the benefit you can enjoy from, right? There's always like disadvantages and disadvantages associated with any new technology. Think about in early days when these like steam engine invented at the very beginning, like we need regulators, we need the like traffic police, like walking beside these engines, walking beside these trains, making sure it's not running faster than horses, right? I mean, nowadays we think this is ridiculous, but in early days we have to be careful of how the new technologies will impact our society. We need to be cautious about, we need to be optimistic about new possibilities, but also be cautious about applying these technologies, because we have to explore a little bit of what the new consequences and new type of applications might be cross the borderline of current laws, and whether we need to change the laws, enforce these laws, making sure everybody is play carefully in this ecosystem, and also continue to educate the public of what is allowable, what is acceptable, and what is definitely not acceptable. We need to maybe regulate the operation of some of the companies, but to a okay level, not strongly interfere the operation of the commercial company, but also making sure there's some like technology monitoring perspective, knowing where the data flow is coming from, whether indeed some of the agreed data usage is transmitting through the correct computational layer, not being transmitted to those places never registered in the government system of saying using the data in an unregistered purpose, right? Once we figure out what is the correct policy, what is the tolerable and benefit can be offered to the public, getting enough agreement, consensus from the commercial and government, the general public, we also need to figure out what will be the correct technology infrastructure, making sure the digital law enforcement can be efficiently implemented. On the one side is really generating this benefit to the society. On the other side, making sure entities are not crossing the borderlines, damaging or negatively impacting the society.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Gong. And we have time for one more question from the audience. I found this question really interesting that our audience brought up. So it's like what we can expect an aging population in the future, especially in China. how can the elders learn how to use those devices implemented in the smart infrastructure system for smart cities? And how can they be educated to take advantage of data, as we just mentioned about the data privacy issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to jump on first. So I'm a strong believer and I'm a fan of Steve Jobs. I think cool technology should not let the users have a feeling of the technology itself, right? Think about this. When you type a lot of things, let your machine start rolling and generate some computation, you think this, wow, this high technology, right? You see a space rocket fire up something and start launching from the ground, you see, wow, that's high technology. But one day when you start like naturally jumping onto your rocket and go into the space, maybe you jump onto an airplane and just take the travel. You just open the iPhone and just roll your fingers and start using it. Like good technology should have no like technology intervention. Like it should like naturally fit into the application, naturally fit into the scenario. Let people have no feeling about technology. That's the right way of implementing it. Speaking from a commercial perspective, right? We're really like trying to lower the bar of technology, democratize the technology, really benefiting the people, not really like to show up the skills, show up the technology itself. So that's really the perspective of how we should democratize technology. In that sense, actually making things easier to use so that even the elder people can use it, right? Think about this. If now you're in China, you go to some like small shop operated by elder people, they give you a barcode. It's printed on sheet paper of saying you can use digital payment, just scan it, pay the money. There will be a voice reporting system saying how much money is being collected, right? There's no intervention at all. And even these elder people with like almost no being educated of how to use these technology, they're already participating into that new like technology upgrade. I think that's the right way of implementing technology.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Dr. Gong said. And I think especially the observation of the Alipay and the WeChat everywhere in China. They give two interesting examples on that. One is actually there's a trend in all the people who build mobile apps to make them more elderly friendly, and that include us. Right now, of course, the effort is mostly around making the fonts better, phone look larger, and to make the app easy to read. But I think it's a healthy trend that even from of course, there's a commercial purpose behind it is to capture all the elderly users. But I saw all the internet company, they're trying to make their applications more friendly to the older generation. And I think that's a very healthy thing. And I think, and again, the second thing that I want to say is that technology should lower the hurdle of using them for the elderly people. And one thing I noticed by traveling, I go on the business trips a lot in China, and I see the taxi riders probably the most frequent users of speech recognition technology, because when I tell them where I want to go, they will say the same thing to their mobile app, their navigation app. And now, with all the technologies, the navigation app does a very good job of recognizing what they say. And in the older generation, the older world, the taxi drivers need to know basically every hotel in the city, and they know every street in the city. Right now, all they do is they shout it to the navigation app, and the speech recognition technology just worked. And we are talking about the people who probably not very good at typing. If they have to type, have you used the pinging system, maybe half of them are unable to get the right address. But right now with this technology, they're able to get that quickly. So that's, I think, a perfect example of how technology actually help people to use those apps easier.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Feng and Professor Burgess, do you want to jump in on that?
No, I want to use the opportunity to address a little bit the second part of your question, which was about sort of updating or informing this part of the society with respect to the privacy challenges and the sort of the power of data and where it lives that is being collected on them. And I don't, so I'll go back to just saying this is definitely a policy issue again. Like, how do we figure out how to inform these people about this, and partly a technology one, but without and without educating that part of the population, I don't think we have done our job. So I just want to emphasize that you raised that question. We all avoided it, but it's a difficult one, but we need to treat it head on. Yeah.
I take a look at the remaining questions. I do think people raise a lot of concerns about privacy and also about people abusing the concept of smart cities. Again, this is a policy issue, but whenever new technology comes, this kind of problem always exists. Even before this new smart infrastructure, before the physical infrastructure, people still abuse it for budget, for other purposes. Okay, so that's always in there. Okay, the smart infrastructure definitely has the same problem. And the elderly people, I think that's a very good question to ask. That's why we truly want to use technology for the good, right? So we think about the elderly people. Mainly people don't put a lot of thoughts on the elderly people. They prioritize the people who can have the they can have a little bit more budget to pay, right? So I think those are the good questions raised. So that's why I want to emphasize that the big tech companies, they do have you need to have the concept of helping the people, because they have a lot of power in hand on the one hand, and then the other hand, you need to use the technology and use the current your place to the good for the society. So I would call for the nonprofit business, NPOs, NGOs, and I think those need to catch up. So I worked with a bunch of people in China that created an NPO to democratize the digital technologies. So we make it available for the common good. Like this conference, I think is a very good conference to help spread the technology, democratize the technologies. So I want to call that out, because the digital company, they do have lots of power in the hand, and they need to do more good to take care of the elderly people, build an application for them. Okay, there might not be a lot of money in there, but they need to work on it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Feng, for your call to action. And we have 4 minutes left, so I would like to ask one more short question. Just keep it short, please. Because it just happens that all our panelists today are either CMU alumni or CMU professors. So can you describe just in a few short sentences, what do you think, what do you envision CMU's role in this development of smart infrastructure, or in general smart technology in the future?
Any order in particular that you would like us to answer this in?
Oh, you can jump in however you like. Yeah.
I mean, so by the way, I am an alum too. So I did PhD at CMU, master's at CMU, and then stayed here. Not in that order, in the reverse order, but I stayed here. So I know from the ground how things look like and what the future of smart infrastructure means for CMU. We have a Smart Infrastructure Institute that is campus-wide and involves people from different parts of campus. We have initiatives that are related to that as well, like Metro 21, Traffic 21, and many others. And I think where things are gearing up to right now is we're trying to set ourselves up as the people redefining what smart infrastructure will mean with newer technologies and newer concerns. I may have given a preview of that in my first remark, when I was trying to define that the word smart in itself changes the meaning depending on what you have available. And we are now thinking that part of that smart is to make the infrastructure more responsible, meaning fair, equitable, interpretable, and all these other things that are sort of setting the power back to where it needs to be, which is the community that it's serving. So that's kind of where things are gearing up, and we have a group of people meeting weekly on this. So, yeah.
Sure. I would love to comment a couple sentences on this as well. First of all, I definitely strongly benefit from receiving education from Carnegie Mellon, especially put all my heart into work. This practical working attitude is really benefiting me a lot when I face a lot of technical challenges and business challenges. So I think that's what CMU can do, create a lot of talents to meet the demands of the upgrade of the society, to help to promote that smart infrastructure. Be responsible, think deep, and follow first principle. Always execute extremely reliably and execute at the standard of Carnegie Mellon. I think that's what we can do, and that's what we should do. And also, we're desperately looking for talents. So if you're interested in smart manufacturing, definitely contact us.
I graduated from the School of Computer Science, which is a really big school that has both the hardware and software side of it. For example, we have the Robotics Institute, which is really great. I think that's a very healthy combination of hardware and software is what, what is needed to build, to cultivate talent for the smart infrastructure. And also CMU is very focused on applications and building applications, not just theories, but things that really works in the reality. And I still remember the Robotics Institute is probably the first department that make autonomous driving vehicles as part of the DARPA project. So I really looking forward to seeing CMU cultivating more talent that for the smart infrastructure.
Basically, I just want to, CMU is a bunch of group of humble people, and we just, my heart is in the work, right? So I just want to call out an example, like before the smart infrastructure, the physical infrastructure in China, Dr. Mao Yisen was the first PhD of China. So actually in 2019, we have the first alum conference in Shanghai. Okay, his daughter actually came, deliver a talk. So I was just calling a role model of Dr. Mao Yisen. Actually, he built the Changjiang Bridge over the Qianjiang River. So during the Second World War, he had to explode the bridge himself and rebuild it after the World War. Okay, so I know that there's lots of concerns around the smart infrastructure. Okay, the smart cities. But I think that's the other thing that we need to think about what's possible. Okay, then let's think what's possible. Then I know there's lots of issues around those possibilities. Okay, then we think about how we deal with those possibilities. But before that, we need to still take the thought leadership as CMU alum. We need to think what's possible and move forward. Of course, and we will be responsible for what's possible. That's my feeling. And I think hopefully in the new smart infrastructure, we have role models like Dr. Mao Yisen. If we can have somebody like him, that'd be great.
Right. Thank you very much for your comments. And we're already a bit over time, so again, let's just end here. But thank you very much for all four of our awesome panelists, and thank you very much for this really great discussion.
Thank you.
Very honored. Thanks. Hope we can connect. Bye bye.